What's up guys, Seth here with ToMarsFilmmakers.com, the largest online film academy in the world, and today we'll be comparing a cheap gimbal and an expensive one, but more importantly, helping you decide how much you should spend on one. Gimbals are an incredible filmmaking tool to work with, and we've discussed them before on this channel, but when it actually comes to buying one, it can be a bit confusing. You'll see a $200 gimbal that looks just like an $800 one and wonder to yourself, well, I'd rather save $600 with this cheaper one that seems to do just the trick. And you may be right in choosing the cheaper one in some cases, but we want to help you truly understand and decide what makes a gimbal cost more and see which price point is right for you. Now this is just going to be a short comparison between two different gimbals, but if you want to learn everything about gimbals, cinematography, and visual storytelling, check out our full course at ToMarsFilmmakers.com. We have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single aspect of filmmaking taught by leading professionals in the film industry. Learn the best from the best. We've taught over 15,000 students in over 50 countries. A lifetime membership to our award-winning $800 film course is only $97. If you want to take advantage of this crazy deal, you can check out our website in the link below and head on over to ToMarsFilmmakers.com to learn more. So if you look at both of these gimbals, you might think, well, they both work and both stabilize my footage, but of course there's much more to look into that separates a cheap and expensive gimbal, and we want to dive into all those differences right now. For this video, we'll be comparing a Filutech AK2000C with the DJI Ronin RS2. The Filutech being the cheap gimbal and the DJI being the expensive one. DJI does have a cheaper model, which is the Ronin SC, but we didn't want this to be a comparison of DJI gimbals. There are 1,000 other cheaper gimbals on the market today, so we wanted to take one of the best gimbals on the market and then compare it to a cheaper one. In this video, we want to explore 5 different categories that are the best things to look at when comparing any sort of gimbal. These being price, weight capacity, design/functionality, features/movements, and last but certainly not least, the stabilization. After comparing these 5 different categories, we hope that you have a better idea of what gimbal would work for you and how much you're willing to spend on one. And while we're on the topic of budgets, let's dive into our first comparison, the price. Now there's many different price points for many different gimbals, but we wanted to showcase and compare a high-end one and a cheap one. The cheap one being the Filutech comes in at about $240 USD on Amazon, while the DJI RS2, the more expensive one, cost about $850. And if you get the combo version, it's closer to $1,000. So that's about a $600 to $800 difference, which is a pretty big difference when considering an investment towards a gimbal. From pictures and afar, they look pretty similar, so you might be more inclined to just save some money and buy the cheaper one. The DJI is almost $1,000, so what makes it that much better? Well, let's keep going and dive into every aspect of what makes these two gimbals cost what they do. The next thing we'll discuss is the weight capacity, or how heavy your setup can be for each of the gimbals to function properly. This is where the price of each gimbal begins to be justified. The RS2 can hold up to 10 pounds for a camera setup, which means anything less than a cinema camera, it can pretty much handle no problem. While the Filutech can only hold about half of that at around 5 pounds. So determining your weight load and your camera setup is a pretty big factor in deciding how much to spend on a gimbal. The cheaper ones like the Filutech usually aren't designed for heavier camera setups. Smaller setups like mirrorless cameras with a light lens is more appropriate for gimbals at this price point. While the Ronin RS2 and others like it can take on bigger setups and therefore provide more flexibility for what gear you can use to shoot with. You'll notice it right away when you try to put a bigger setup on the Filutech, because if your lens is too heavy, it will fall forward no matter how much you try to adjust it. This gimbal says it can support a Panasonic GH5S, but once we put a larger lens on it, it was at its maximum payload and started to collapse. You can also immediately notice a difference if you try to put a bigger camera body on the Filutech versus the DJI. The Filutech has a noticeably smaller area where the camera can go, while the RS2 has a bigger area and therefore meant for bigger setups. So figuring out if the gimbal you're looking for can even support your camera is a necessity. The next comparison is going to be the design and functionality of each gimbal. Now, like I said, from afar, these two gimbals look pretty similar, but it's when you get closer and further inspect them that you see the difference, and a lot of those revolve around the design and material that these two gimbals are made of. The Filutech weighs about 2.5 pounds and is made mostly of aviation aluminum alloys. The Ronin RS2 is actually slightly lighter at about 2.35 pounds and is made primarily of carbon fiber construction. You can tell right off the bat that the RS2 is the more expensive one just by holding them both in your hands. The RS2 feels higher quality, more natural, and has a much better grip than the Filutech. However, I do like the wood accent on the Filutech grip, but it serves only as a visual design and doesn't aid in the grip or functionality of the gimbal. The buttons and joystick on the RS2 are also higher quality and feel better when using them versus the Filutech. Overall though, they both look and function like a gimbal, so I wouldn't say this should be the biggest factor in deciding how much to spend, but the material and grip of the RS2 does justify its price point and definitely makes it the more expensive option. Now moving on to one of the bigger categories, and that is the gimbal features and movements. Both of these gimbals offer a good amount of modes, buttons, and features, but of course the RS2 does offer things that the Filutech doesn't have. But are these added features to the DJI really worth the investment for you? Let's start off by talking about the things that they have in common. I won't go into every little feature and setting and how they work because this isn't an in-depth review of each gimbal, but I will mention what most people will be using. They can both do all your standard gimbal movements and rotations. They both have a joystick that you can use to move the camera in any direction you want. They both have a trigger at the back that can be used to keep the camera level to get things like low shots of people walking or running. Both have a nice touchscreen that allows you to scroll through many settings and functions and get to them easily. Both of them have a record button that you can use if you plug your camera into the gimbal and just want to press record on the gimbal to make it easier when shooting. They also both have a barrel roll mode that allows you to do a unique shot where you push or pull towards a subject or object and the camera will spin around in circles, creating a really cool outcome. They both have a time-lapse mode where you can set your gimbal to move slowly over time to give some nice motion in your time-lapse. And of course, you're able to go into each gimbal and customize numerous settings relating to the gimbal speed, smoothness, and axis locks. Those are the big things that they have in common regarding features, and I'd say that pretty much covers most of what you'll need to shoot. The Filutech has all the standard settings and functions of most gimbals, so saving some money won't hurt too much in regards to this category. But like I said, and like the price point says, the RS2 does have some features that the Filutech doesn't have, and could be worth it to you when deciding how much to spend. The first thing I want to point out that I found super helpful on the RS2 is that it has a small dial for making little adjustments when balancing the camera on the tilt axis. Another really cool feature the RS2 has is a front dial that's right above the trigger that can be used for pulling focus if you have the proper camera attachments, as well as customizing it to change certain camera settings like ISO or aperture if you have your camera hooked up to the gimbal. Also, many DJI products have an active track feature. This allows you to select a subject on the touchscreen and the gimbal will automatically follow and keep them in frame. Along with a few others, these features really help the RS2 and other more expensive gimbals stand out and could be an important factor for you in deciding how much to spend. Either way you go though, just know they both can do a lot and figure out whether or not extra features on the more expensive gimbals are really worth it to you. And finally, the last and most important comparison for these two gimbals is what the gimbal is actually made for, and that is stabilization. So we did various different types of shots and movements with both gimbals to ensure we had a good variety of testing. We'll walk through each of them and see how they did. The first one here is a simple follow shot, which both performed really well in. This is a simple movement, so we didn't expect any crazy shakes or jitters out of either of them. The DJI one here performs pretty much flawlessly as expected with no noticeable shake. The Filutech did pretty dang good as well, but you are able to see a couple of shakes here and there and are slightly able to see the difference between the two. The next shot we have is a simple side follow shot, which both gimbals did really well with again. The Filutech actually performed up to par with the DJI one here because they look practically identical if you watch them back to back, so no problems using the cheaper gimbal for this movement. The next one we have is a parallax around a subject. The DJI performed flawlessly again here, and with the Filutech, you could tell a bit of a difference again with some shakes here and there, but overall, not terrible. These last two movements is when you could really start to see the difference and the Filutech began to struggle a bit. Here we have a low follow shot. The DJI did really well again, but the Filutech had a lot more shake than the previous test, and the difference here was pretty obvious. And the final movement here was the most obvious difference, with it being a running shot. The DJI again justified its price point by performing really well with very minimal shake. The Filutech though, not so much. This was the worst performance of all the movements from this gimbal, and the difference between the two was very obvious here. Now we tried using multiple different setups on the Filutech with light lenses, heavy lenses, different cameras, but the results were pretty much the same for the last few movements, and we weren't able to get it any more stable. I do want to point out here that the Filutech does work well with simple basic movements, but once we get into the more advanced shots like the low shot and running shot, it does start to struggle a bit, and the DJI excels. So for a real world example, the Filutech would work great for things like a wedding where there's simple shots, slow movement, and no running, but for anything else, the DJI justifies its price point. There's different features and factors that make this gimbal one of the more expensive ones, but I think the biggest contributor would be its exceptional stabilization. So, which one do you buy? Well, it obviously comes down to what you need to use it for, but we hope that this video has helped make the decision a bit easier for you. The Filutech is a good all-around gimbal with standard features and can get the job done for most gimbal work, plus it's the cheaper option. However, it all depends on what camera you'll be using or even what lens you will be putting on it. If you need a reliable gimbal that you'll be shooting on a lot and for high quality products, even though it's more expensive, the RS2 and others like it is the way to go. So I hope this video has helped you guys out. As we say with any gear video though, you can research and buy all the gear you want, but if you don't know how to use it efficiently, it's pointless. having the gear isn't near as important as having the skill to use it properly. So if you'd like to learn even more about gimbals and check out everything about how to use them, you can check out our full course at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com. We have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single subject of filmmaking that you can imagine. If you'd like to join over 15,000 other filmmakers just like you, pursue their dreams, and learn all about film, click the link below and sign up for our full academy for 90% off. A lifetime membership to our award-winning $800 film course is only $97. So click the link in the description and head on over to tomorrowsfilmmakers.com to learn all the skills that you need to succeed.
And go. Oh gosh, the gimbal is awful.